Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Dr. Sonya Makhni, Medical Director of Applied Informatics at the Mayo Clinic Platform. Dr. Makhni is also a hospitalist at Mayo Clinic Rochester. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor-in-chief. Dr. Makhni, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Anthony. Appreciate it.
All right, why don't we start out if you want to tell us a little bit about your organization and your role?
Sure. So I work as a hospitalist at Mayo Clinic, and I'm a medical director of applied informatics at Mayo Clinic Platform. So you might be familiar with Mayo Clinic. Mayo Clinic Platform was developed by Mayo Clinic to enable innovation in healthcare and solve some of the pressing problems that healthcare faces. So ours is a true platform business model, which means we bring together key pieces of the healthcare puzzle. So innovators, end users like clinicians and health systems. And we break down the barriers that were previously siloing these groups in the past, preventing or slowing down collaboration. And so data really is the foundation, the knowledge foundation of Mayo Clinic Platform. And so we've partnered with top hospitals and health systems around the world to create a data network. And the hope is that this diverse, de-identified data that is of great depth, breadth, and spread can be made available to solution developers who are building AI solutions and allow access to data in a way that's secure and more scalable. And so in this way, we kind of hope to break down some of those silos.
Excellent. You work with our good friend, Dr. John Halamka, who I got
Yeah,
to see 2 days ago at the Vive conference, or yet I think it was the day before yesterday.
he's
So it's
wonderful.
always, yeah,
He's really a wonderful mentor, a wonderful leader, and we're very, very lucky to have, him as part of our organization.
no doubt, no doubt. That's
Mhm.
excellent. All right, so I want to catch up with you. We're putting together a supplement, a HIMSS preview. So speaking of some people doing sessions there, as I mentioned, I was just at the Vive conference. Now next week we have HIMSS. So, they pack them close together, these two big shows.
Absolutely.
Uh, so, um, anyway, two sessions you're doing, both are on AI, but they're a little different. So, the first, I think we'll take them one at a time and then go into the topics a little bit. So the first one we're going to discuss is AI strategy, the critical role of data integrity and validity. So very interesting. Let's talk about that. As I mentioned, I was just at the Vive conference and everybody's talking about AI, but when they're talking about AI that's currently in use, they're really talking about ambient listening, which, is AI, and it's sort of the perfect tool for the perfect use case, and it's taking off, and um, it's really helping health systems. If we're going to go beyond that as a use case and get into more advanced areas, the things people dream about in the clinical space with clinical decision support, everybody seems to know and understand you need to do two things. Hopefully the models get better and we reduce hallucinations, but we also need health systems to really improve their data because you can't put a great algorithm on bad data and you're not going to get a good result. I've also talked to people that talk about running multiple hospitals, many of which have come together through M&A, and you can't run a great algorithm on bad data, especially if data is different from one hospital to the next. You're not going to get uniform results, uniform measures, these kind of things. So let's start with data. And, it's a tall order. And I'm going to frame it this way. It's almost like they can't afford to wait. It'd be great if everybody could put in 2, 3 years of data work, which is really, really, really hard work. It's not flipping a switch. You can't hire a vendor. It's hard, long-term work. So you would need a couple years to really get your data in order, but nobody has time to wait. Um, so anyway, your thoughts around the relationship between leveraging AI and the underlying data, where you think many hospitals are when it comes to the quality of the underlying data, and maybe any thoughts about how they can get things in shape, at least some starting steps, low-hanging fruit, that kind of a thing.
As you mentioned very correctly, data is the foundation. Data is where it all begins. And it's funny, data quality isn't always the fun topic at these conferences, right? It's not the fun, exciting,
No.
it's not the topic that draws people in. I love it. I think it's awesome. But data quality is really important because that implies accuracy of the data, integrity of the data, validity of the data, um, reliability, timeliness. There's all sorts of components that come with data quality. And when you have better data, you have a better substrate to work with to create algorithms because everything after that really relies on what you're building upon. So we all hear that phrase garbage in, garbage out. And it really is kind of true because what happens when you have data that is incomplete, right? You could have a worse model that's less accurate. You could have a model that's more biased. It might not generalize to different populations and it could create downstream harm. So when we think about data strategy and AI strategy, I see them as highly related, if not completely intertwined. And we certainly have taken that approach at Mayo Clinic Platform with our distributed data network. Data quality underpins, everything. And so once we can work to get our data to a place that we feel confident in, we can feel more confident in our AI models that we develop. And as you mentioned, it's a tall order, it's a tall task, and it really should be because so much is at stake, and we need to make sure that we're going about these processes correctly. So for IT administrators or leaders that are trying to embark on this journey, there's a few really key things that's just critical to do. And assembling a team, a multidisciplinary team that has experience in different roles. So IT, data science, clinical, legal compliance, and people with different domain expertise in the different data types. Imaging data might be handled very differently than genomics data and so forth. So having that diverse set of skills so that you can come together, establish the standards for data quality, adopt the policies and procedures for privacy and security, because we have to comply with regulations. You must do that. And then, of course, just understanding, once you have all those pieces in motion, understanding your data, understand the data lineage, the data mapping, and creating a data catalog. All of these are incredibly critical, and I think that'll help get you set up to really knowing what are the gaps. And you can use tools to help with the data provenance, to help with the data processing. There's a lot of pieces out there that you can bring in. And that's kind of, how I see the core in terms of just getting started.
Yeah, it's just, you make some great points, the multidisciplinary team. And it just makes me think of how important this data piece is. And I guess depending on your size, I mean, I don't know if you need a chief data officer, but it certainly couldn't hurt. I mean, you need to have someone who's in charge of data at a very, very high level in your health system. There are a lot of C-suite, the C-suite, IT related C-suite titles have exploded in healthcare, right? It used to be maybe the CIO. Now you probably have five, six, seven. C-suite IT titles, and some of them, I don't know if you need every single one of them, but to me, I don't even know if you need a chief AI officer, but it seems to me it would be even more important to have a chief data officer than a chief AI officer because the data is everything. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of different ways to structure an organization, and it really just depends on the organization and their resources and their judgment. I think having the domain expertise is critical, and I think that's exactly what you're alluding to is make sure that there's a data expert, make sure
Mhm.
someone can navigate the privacy and security requirements, and make sure someone can understand really truly what data is present, where there might be quality gaps, and the that information can be highly informative and critical to any of the AI endeavors that come downstream. And so the key there is is a diversity of experiences, a diversity of skills, and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I mean the multidisciplinary team, it makes a whole lot of sense because you can just picture exchanges of information around a table of things people want to do, move forward with, and then getting input from other folks such as whoever's in charge of the data who might say, well, I'm not so sure about that yet. There's certain things, like to say, hey, slow the brakes on that because of reasons you might not realize, or cybersecurity, or you mentioned privacy, compliance, have all these people around and the CIO and someone in charge, maybe someone dealing with specifically with AI. You really need to get all these people to have regular discussions. Um, and hopefully everyone has the right interest in moving things forward
Yeah.
because it can get complicated, if you have someone who's overcautious and constantly putting the brakes on. So it's almost like you really need everyone with the same objectives, the same risk appetite. And maybe that's got to come from the CEO and the board. What's our risk appetite? What are we trying to do? That's where you get your objectives. It's not easy, but your thoughts, any thoughts around that?
I think a diversity of thought is always the key. I think different opinions are always important and kind of it helps bring everyone to the middle ground, which is often, the place that might be the right path forward. So, it's difficult to say exactly, but I know that if you can represent different stakeholders that are very attuned to the different considerations of the groups they're representing, from my experience, you usually end up with a healthy discussion and ending up in a better place kind of as a group.
All right, very good. So that's a little bit around sort of data quality and the concept of getting the underlying data in order to layer models and algorithms and prompts and really the concept that resonates with me that I've heard discussed is empowering the users, giving them a safe place to play, a safe sandbox almost. You think of it as you give them safe sandboxes to play, safe, and you give them some models to use where they can throw in patient data, and it's a private, secure environment. So they get you wanna let them play, right?
Yeah.
You wanna let really smart people play with fun stuff and see what they can do with it in a safe, controlled way. Um, there's another term here, which is data access. Now, tell me what we mean when we talk about data access as opposed to data quality.
I mean, data access can itself mean many things. I can share with you sort of our approach at Mayo
Yeah.
Clinic Platform. So data access, doesn't mean free for all access to highly sensitive data by all parties. What it means is a methodical approach to facilitate innovation without ever compromising patient information. And we take that really seriously. So as I mentioned, we have a very deep corpus of data representing Mayo Clinic patients and soon to be other health systems that have joined our network. And we make sure the data goes through expert certification for de-identification. And in de-identifying the data, we also place additional policies and process safeguards. In doing so, we can safely make this data available in pieces, right? We still have safeguards. We still don't want everyone to be able to have everything or to extract or exfiltrate data, but we can put appropriate safeguards on the data so that we can enable authorized users to access the data to innovate, to, like you said, so that we can enable collaboration. We can enable innovators who might not otherwise have access to data. We can enable them to come in and develop an algorithm using their deep expertise. And not only that, because of the privacy and security constraints being upheld, they might be able to collaborate with the clinicians. So our idea of access very much so rests on those principles.
Hmm.
That the patient comes first and that patient safety and security is paramount. And then how do we accelerate innovation without compromising those ideals? And that's really what we've built through our de-identified data and what we continue to build through our Connect network, which will hopefully help provide even more diverse data to bring to the table for innovators and collaborators to, develop really important innovations.
That's is that like a paramount to me, that's like a paramount idea or paradigm of what IT executives and health systems need to be doing today. You have really, really smart people working in your organization who want to innovate, they're creative, they know these tools exist, and it is incumbent upon you to provide safe, secure ways and compliant ways for them to play. I like to use the word play, but um
I know what you mean,
and
yeah.
you have to do that, and if you're not doing that, if you have not put these structures in place to where they can't play, you are hampering the ability of your organization to flourish. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the reality is there's a lot of challenges for different health systems with different resources. And I think it's a collective goal to try to get everybody, along the same plane so we don't leave anybody behind because there are resources required, there are personnel required, there are processes required. And so to do this effectively and safely, we want to be able to facilitate collaboration, like I said, through a network is one example. There's other ways as well. But healthcare is challenging, and when we deliver patient care, we often have a lot of other considerations. And so, the hope is that collectively we can come together as a global and national ecosystem to make sure that we're representing all of the patients that we are caring for.
Yeah, and I actually discussed this with Dr. Halamka, the idea of the sort of buckets of health systems. The academic medical centers are, could be one group. Then you have more of a community hospital with some affiliated organizations, and then you might have critical access. So, and we discussed how they should have different goals and different expectations. You're not going to have a critical access hospital with the same goals as an academic medical center. So, based on where you are in that continuum, you need to have realistic objectives that align with your resources, right?
And yeah, that is exactly correct.
All right, very good. Let's talk a little bit about the other session you're doing, unlocking AI in healthcare with federated learning and generative AI. Can you explain to me what we mean when we say federated learning? And when we're using that term, I assume we're talking about as opposed to something else. And what would that be?
So simply put, federated learning is a way to train AI models on different sources of data without actually requiring a physical data exchange across devices or servers or boundaries. So it's a collaborative, decentralized approach to training algorithms that allows others to retain, their own privacy and security measures of the data that they are responsible for. So typically algorithms are trained on data that is centralized in one location.
Hmm.
However, we know the limitations. So if you have a very specific subset or geography that's represented by that data, you might not develop an algorithm that's very generalizable to other groups outside of that population. So an alternative to federated learning means you put all data from different sources in one pot
Hmm.
and centralize it. And there's a lot of risk to that. So
Okay.
if you were to do that, you open up to unintentional risk like data leakage. So in the process of data moving, some data could just be, could leak out, for lack of a better word. You also open up to amplified cybersecurity risks. So if there's a breach, now
Hmm.
you're talking about data from multiple sites. So there's a
Okay.
lot at stake. And then, of course, the individual sites have less or lose control of their data, and they're responsible for the those patients that they represent. And so that forces them to rely on a third party's policies and practices. So federated learning allows you to train algorithms on different data that represents different populations to hopefully make a better algorithm that's more generalizable without some of those security risks that I just mentioned.
So is the federated learning a model that people are moving towards? Is it a little more complicated to do than the previous model? So, or is everybody going to do it, or is it sort of a hurdle, but it's worth it?
We certainly have viewed this as a worthwhile endeavor. So
Mhm.
that is what we are, embarking on with our Connect data network.
Mhm.
So it does require some resources. So, adhering to a common data model is extremely important. So if you think about it, different health systems may encode their data in different ways, not just by what they call the data, but also what the data means, even if there's the similar terms. So we, are conforming the data to a common data model so that all the data speaks the same language. There's certainly other infrastructure considerations as well that require, us to keep up with the computing power, the processing, and keeping everything secure, and the technical interoperability of it all, making sure that the systems can talk to each other. So we very much so recognize that this is a wave of the future, so that we can develop more generalizable algorithms that are hopefully represent less bias and they're more accurate because they encompass populations that we might not be able to alone. And we are certainly going forward with making those investments that I mentioned. And I think that there's going to be different ways of approaching, and we might see different models come about, but that's certainly something that we are very, very much so prioritizing.
All right, very good. Let's talk about, do you think that uh, generative AI is changing the nature of the relationship and interaction that users have with data? And tell me how.
I think that it is changing and has great potential to change. So I say potential because I think, we still need to get to a place where we're at, the highest potential of generative AI healthcare. But I can tell you kind of how that's going now and where that might continue to go. So some of the largest time sinks on clinicians is in documentation. So not only writing documentation that's accurate, current, reflects the most important issues, but also in understanding the patient. So when I come onto a week of service, when I'm getting, 15 or 18 new patients, I spend hours reading through every patient's chart. And that sometimes means hundreds of notes because the notes aren't always, they don't always capture everything. And sometimes there could be something buried in a note from a month ago if they've been there, if they've been in the hospital for 3 months. And so it's really important to me as a clinician that I know absolutely everything I can possibly know. And that I summarize that so that, let's say, a problem develops during my care that they've experienced before. I want to know how it was dealt with previously. I want to know what worked, what didn't work. I want all that information at my fingertips. So I personally spend hours and hours just learning the patients, and then hours a day making sure my notes are reflective of the current situation so that other providers at night might, who are covering at night might understand the situation. Generative AI can revolutionize the way we do this task by by providing summaries, by assisting in documentation, assisting in notes. And this could really help reduce time spent on burdens that could be, augmented by a tool like this, and allow physicians to operate even more at the top of their license, to spend more time actually in the room with the patient, talking to them, delivering care. So I think there's huge potential. I think it's a ongoing journey because we have to be careful of certain pieces like hallucination and things like that. And I think those are implementing the right guardrails and guidelines and processes is paramount, in addition to monitoring and making sure we're our algorithms aren't changing and drifting over time and impacting us. But I think it's a journey we're already on, and hopefully will continue to progress as we implement these other safeguards as well.
All right, very good. We're just about out of time. Let me just ask you sort of an open-ended final question, and then I'll let you go. Um, and this is how I usually frame it up. What's your best piece of advice to someone in your position at a comparably sized organization? So, same dynamics, same resources, same size, just you somewhere else.
Yeah,
Based on your experience and things you maybe hard lessons learned, what's your best piece of advice to that person?
I think that there's a couple pieces of advice, but I think the paramount one is knowledge, learning as much as we can about the tools that we ultimately provide to our clinicians or use to deliver care, it comes with a responsibility to really understand as much as we can about the pros, the cons. That's what we go into medical training for, understanding indications, contraindications, correct uses, incorrect uses. So I think learning about these tools is paramount. And not only learning, because not everyone, I'm very fortunate to have been able to take some extra training in informatics and data science. I think that might not always be possible, but that's okay because we can collaborate. So collaborating with experts that have expertise in areas that, I don't have, or they see things more deeply than me, that's been such a powerful resource and powerful, honestly, gift, because at the end of the day, we're all going to try to solve for the same thing, that's delivering better care to our patients. And we can all come at this with different angles. So understanding all pieces of the puzzle is going to be so helpful for every one of us, including myself, in kind of pushing the field forward in the right direction.
That's wonderful, Dr. Makhni. I want to thank you so much for your time today. I hope we can catch up with you down the road.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really great discussion. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.